Hello, welcome to the Gay Cruise and Travel Podcast with me, just Joey T. All right, today we have a special topic. School is in session. This is going to be my points and miles 101. Well, maybe a 101 series because I've been wanting to talk about miles and points for quite a while now, and I actually have been doing a few different documents of outlines of the different episodes of the various things I want to talk about because it can get pretty complicated. But for today, we are going to start it off very, very light. This is not going to be an hour-long podcast. We're going to keep it very breezy, very simple, and we're just going to dip our collective toes, listeners, into the world of miles and points. A lot of you out there have some knowledge and experience with miles and points. However, we're just going to slow things down for this initial intro to miles and points for those people who don't really know what miles and points are. Maybe some of you out there are just recently starting adult life, maybe just recently starting college or just graduated recently. You're in your late teens, early 20s. And, this whole miles points thing, using credit cards and travel is all new to you. Well, today we're going to kick off with a very light, very easy intro, okay? No need to take notes. Sit back and relax, and I'll make things as painless as possible. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about miles and points is it's actually a great way to help subsidize or sometimes even pay for the bulk of your travel. And this is a travel podcast, and with inflation the way it is, and with the cost of cruises and airplane tickets and things like that not necessarily getting any cheaper. I do talk a lot about the cruises, and they're not cheap, to be really honest. They're not that cheap. So what I wanted to do was help educate you all on how we can use miles and points to make travel more accessible, especially from a financial point of view. And there are a lot of talk about using miles and points out there on the internet, using them to fly business class on the cheap. That's one way of using miles and points that I see all the time on the internet. Every day there's an article about, there's some deal for using points to book some fancy business class to go to Europe or some other thing. And that's great, but we do talk about cruises a lot on this podcast, and there's not a lot of talk generally about using points and miles for a cruise vacation. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well, because I think that particular type of trip in terms of points and miles is not talked about very much, and there are reasons for that, which we will get into. But all right, let's back up. What are miles and points? Okay. Basically, it's an incentive or a reward for companies to make you be one of their customers, to make you be a patron of their products and services at the very core, okay? Maybe you go to a Best Buy and you buy something and you have a chance to earn some Best Buy points, okay? You take a flight with Delta, and in exchange for you, being a Delta customer, in exchange for you giving Delta your money to buy one of their plane tickets, they will reward you with X number of Sky Miles, which is what they call their miles system. So usually when you do something like take a flight or stay at a hotel, then the airline or the hotel company will be willing to, give you some points. Or when you buy something, like the Best Buy example, or sometimes when you use a credit card and spend money on the credit card, you spend X number of dollars, they'll give you X number of points for that transaction that's on that credit card. And how is it like a reward? How is it like an incentive? What's the point of all these companies giving you miles and points and things like that? Well, you can use those miles and points and exchange them for various things. So the Delta example, let's say you regularly fly Delta, okay? And over time, after you've taken so many flights with Delta, you have maybe 60,000 Delta miles in your Delta account. And you know what? With 60,000 miles, you can actually book an entire trip with that and pretty much not have to pay any money. There might be like $5 or $10 worth of fees that the miles can't cover, but with 60,000 airline miles, you can probably do a domestic round trip. Depends on which cities. Obviously, not all flights are the same price, whether that is in cash money currency or in the points or miles currency. But yeah, you can take the 60,000 miles you have, you can go to Delta's website, and you can actually book a whole flight on 60,000 miles without using money. So you can do that. So that's one example, right? And the advantage for Delta, like why would Delta give me all these miles? It's because you've been giving them a lot of business. You've been giving them a lot of cash money. And it's a way for Delta, the airline in this case, for them to keep you coming back to them, right? So it's a little more complicated than that. The whole it's actually quite a complicated topic in terms of the customer retention and the loyalty and how these miles and points systems are actually quite valuable for the airlines and the hotels. But to keep things simple, airlines and hotels and all these companies will give you these points and miles by you being a repeated, loyal, and most importantly, a spending customer with them. It's basically to keep you coming back to them. Okay. Now, how are they earned? So I mentioned that, hey, if you take a Delta flight, they will give you some Delta miles for taking that flight. But obviously, with a hotel, you stay at a Marriott, they'll give you some Marriott points. Okay. There are other ways to do it, like with credit cards. Okay, there are a lot of credit cards out there. Not every credit card. It depends on the specific credit card in use. But there are a lot of credit cards out there that will give you points just by spending money on them. Okay, so let's say you take a credit card that gives you, for example, 1 point for every dollar you put on that credit card. So you take that credit card, you go grocery shopping. You buy $50 worth of groceries that week. Now you have 50 points that you just earned by doing something you would probably just do anyways. Most people buy groceries. So that's another way that you can earn miles. So it's either you do something, take a flight, stay at a hotel, blah, 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 or you spend money. Like you put money on a credit card, you transact on a credit card, and then the credit card company or the bank that issue you the credit card will give you some points or miles for that transaction. By the way, I'm saying points and miles a lot. Effectively, they're kind of sort of interchangeable things. It's like a name is a name is a name type of a thing. So airlines obviously tend to use miles, quote unquote, more than use points, whereas everyone else tends to use the name points instead of miles, right? So obviously miles, distance travel, airlines, you kind of sort of get it. But effectively, whether a company calls it miles or points, the way you earn them, the way you use them, the way you treat them is pretty much very, very similar, if not identical. Okay, so now that we have an idea what points and miles are, and we have an idea of how they can be used, they can be exchanged for things like travel or to buy things, how they can be earned by you doing something like traveling or you spending money and then getting the points and miles, earning them that way. Let's talk about the types of miles and points that are out there. So I've got 3 major categories. We talked about airlines and hotels already. So that's in a category of travel providers. So any company that provides travel, an airline, hotels, those are like the big easy examples. A lot of those companies have a miles and points system. So Delta has Sky Miles and Hilton has Honors. Marriott has Bonvoy. So they all have some sort of name for their miles and points program. Sometimes it's called a loyalty program or a frequent flyer program. And then there are other travel providers, any company that provides some sort of travel, like cruise lines. All cruise lines have systems like that as well, for example. Another category of miles and points is a travel portal. So the travel portals, like Expedia, for example, they are not the airlines or they're not the hotels. Now, Expedia don't run their own hotels and airlines, but like it's a service, a travel portal, if you will, that you use to book travel. And those companies are getting in on the miles and points game as well. So Expedia, Hotels.com, and Verbal, for example, they have a system called OneKey that all three of those websites share. So that's a slightly newer thing. You know, airlines, hotels have been doing points and miles for decades now. Travel portals, online travel portals are a newer thing, and they are only more recently trying to get into the points and miles game as well. Finally, we have what I call transferable points. And this usually comes from financial institutions that issue credit cards. So your Chase Bank, your Amex, your Capital One. Like Capital One, they're always running ads. So you probably have seen a lot of Capital One ads to talk about this credit card and that credit card that they have. And that's the category. That is one of my favorite categories of points. So they're called transferable points because with these types of points, you can transfer them to another points system. Let's say I have an American Express credit card. I have an Amex, okay? And every time I buy something with it, it's earning Amex points. You know, the Amex points currency, if you will. But Amex has partnered with a bunch of airlines and hotels where I can take my Amex points and transfer them to one of their airline or hotel partners, okay? So let's say I've got 10,000 Amex points that I've earned with my Amex credit card. It's sitting in my Amex account. But I want to go book a Marriott, okay? So I won't necessarily be able to book a Marriott hotel directly using the Amex points. But Amex is a partner of Marriott's. So they have a partnership. That means I can take my 10,000 Amex points, log into my Amex account, and there will be a transfer webpage or feature or function somewhere, and I can transfer those 10,000 Amex miles into some number of Marriott points, miles, points, whatever. The ratio depends. So, but let's say in this example, it's like a 1-to-1 ratio, just for simplicity. So I can take my 10,000 Amex points, and it will transfer at a 1-to-1 ratio. And now I have 10,000 Marriott points. And I can take those 10,000 Marriott points and book 1 or 2 night stay at some Marriott hotel somewhere. Okay, so that's why they're usually called transferable points. Because usually, you know, with a Chase credit card, with an Amex credit card, a Capital One credit card, whatever it is, usually you can't use those points directly with a airline or a hotel to book a flight or to book a hotel stay, for example. And they do usually partner with quite a lot of these travel providers, usually somewhere between like 10 to 15. They usually have about 10 to 15 partners that they partner with and therefore allow their currency to be transferred to these miles and points for these travel providers. Yeah, that's usually the type of transferable points that I like to earn and collect because they're a little bit more flexible. They're sometimes, in a way, a little easier to earn. Now, it does get more complicated than that. As an example, there could be co-branded credit cards, okay? There could be a Delta-branded American Express, okay, where with this Delta Airlines branded American Express credit card, whenever I use it to buy things, it's not earning Amex points, it's earning Delta Sky Miles. That's a little bit more advanced, but I just want to acknowledge the existence of that for those of you that are like, but Joey, that's not true, blah, blah, blah. We're just keeping things very simple for the beginners out there. It does get more complicated, as you can imagine, but we'll leave the more advanced miles and points topics for a different day. That is kind of like the bare basics of what are miles and points. How can they be used? How can they be redeemed for something? How can they be earned? How do you get more miles and points? And then the types of miles and points that are out there, at least like the major ones that you're most likely to hear about. Again, this is a gay cruise and travel podcast, gay and cruise being the leading parts of the name of this podcast. So I want to switch gears a bit and talk more specifically about the case of an Atlantis cruise. Okay, I talk a lot about Atlantis cruises, but I just want to do a case study on points and miles for an Atlantis cruise. How can I use points and miles for an Atlantis cruise? So, using points and miles for a flight with a major airline or for hotel stays with major hotel chains are very easy. It's very easy to do that, okay? Unfortunately, when you get to smaller travel companies, Atlantis is a small company. They only sail about 6 or 8 cruises a year, and that's it. For just, if you went to Royal Caribbean, one of the biggest cruise lines in the world, they own, 20, 30, 40, 50 cruise ships. They have a ton of cruise ships that they own. They actually design and own them. And they're sailing, multiple cruises every week all over the world. That's the scales are very different. The smaller of a travel company it is, the less likely that you're going to be able to redeem points and miles directly for travel with that smaller travel company. And Atlantis is a very small travel company on the grand scheme of things. So Atlantis themselves, they don't have a miles and points system. Delta has their own Sky Miles program. Marriott has their own Bonvoy program. American Express has their own program called Membership Rewards, okay? Atlantis, they don't have a points and miles system. So it's not like every time you sail with Atlantis, they're going to give you some sort of points or miles as a reward, as an incentive. They don't have this system, okay? You also can't book an Atlantis cruise on most travel portals and with most travel agents, most travel advisors. Like if you go to Expedia, you're not going to find an Atlantis cruise. The ways to book an Atlantis cruise is with Atlantis directly, and we've already established Atlantis themselves, they don't have a miles and points system. Or you go to one of the very few travel advisors, travel agents that have been set up to book people onto an Atlantis cruise. And none of those independent travel agents have any sort of points and miles system. Points and miles systems is really more for like big corporations and big banks and large travel providers like major airlines and major hotel chains. Those are the only companies that are doing miles and points, right? However, there are ways to use credit card transferable points to cover travel expenses that you charge to certain credit cards, regardless of the type of travel that it is. It could be an Atlantis cruise, it could be any kind of cruise, it could be an Uber, ride share for you taking an Uber from one part of town to another locally. So there are certain credit cards and certain types of points that will basically let you cover a purchase or a travel purchase with the points that you would have in that account. And it doesn't matter what kind of travel it is, as long as it shows up as a travel, as long as it shows up on your credit card. There are few nuances and details there, and not all points can do this, and not all credit cards can do this. But some of the Capital One credit cards, for example, will let you redeem the miles in your Capital One account for any travel-related expense on your credit card that you've incurred within the last 90 days. All right. So if you just bought an Atlantis cruise, okay, you just booked an Atlantis cruise and you've charged it to one of these credit cards, then you have 90 days to use some or all of the miles that are in your Capital One account, and you can have it kind of cover some or all of that Atlantis charge that was put onto your credit card for booking that cruise. So that's one way to get a Atlantis cruise specifically in this specific example, to use miles and points to cover your Atlantis cruise. Some or part of the cost depends on how many miles you have to spend. However, you can also use miles and points to cover the other parts of your cruise vacation. A lot of you have to fly to the port city to get on the ship. You know, a lot of the Atlantis cruises lately sail out of Miami. And maybe you live in Seattle, so you have to take like a 6-hour flight from one corner of the country to the opposite corner. And flights cost money. So, you can easily use miles and points. Like I said, most major airlines, they have a miles and points system. Booking a flight domestically within the US using miles and points, it's quite easy. So you can use your miles and points to do that. I always recommend people fly in the day before your cruise sets sail. So if your cruise departs on a Sunday, I've always strongly recommended, hey, fly in on the Saturday or even earlier. So just in case there are flight delays or your travel plans, something unexpected happens, you give yourself a bit of time to still make your way and get yourself to the port city, Miami or whatever city it is, because the cruise doesn't really wait. So it's not, they're not going to really care that much that your flight got delayed. So that's why I always recommend flying in at least one day before. And if you take my advice, that means you need some sort of accommodation, like a hotel or an Airbnb or what it is the night before. And you can use points and miles to easily cover that. Like I said, lots of hotels have points and miles systems that will let you use points and miles to redeem for a free night. So that's perfect. So yeah, specifically for the case of an Atlantis cruise, I think it's pretty easy to use points and miles to cover, at the minimum, the flights that you're going to take to and from the port city, and also to cover any hotel stays that you're going to have either right before the cruise. Like I said, I always recommend flying in a night before. Or if you choose to prolong your vacation, extend your vacation, and stay a few days at the port city either before or after the cruise, you can use points and miles to book some extra nights. And it's kind of, if you use the points and miles, it's kind of sort of effectively a free extension of your cruise vacation. So yeah, there are ways to, use points and miles to make your Atlantis cruise cheaper. And that's going to be something I would like to talk about a little bit more in the future. But that is it for today. I really wanted to keep it short. Some of you that have listened to my podcasts before knows that I can keep talking on and on and on. I intentionally wanted to keep this one around like 20-25 minutes and not have it go on super long. And I wanted to keep the topic to be really simple. It's points and miles 101. I have it in my notes, this is more like the 001, because I just want it to be like the really, really simple parts of the miles and points game. I always refer to it as a game, because for the people that really get into points and miles, I'm kind of sort of like intermediate. Some people get super, super into miles and points to the level where they're churning credit cards. They'll get new credit cards to get the sign-up offers that are on a lot of credit cards, where when you apply for a credit card and you spend X amount of money within the X first few months of getting the credit card, they'll give you X amount of bonus miles and points for doing that. So that's called a sign-up bonus in a credit card world. I know there's some people out there that churn through credit cards on a very specific and structured way, and they time when they get new credit cards, when they get rid of old credit cards, in order to keep earning these sign-up bonuses over and over again. So that's quite advanced. That's not what I'm going to be talking about on this Gay Cruise and Travel podcast. If you're interested in that, there are some probably better resources out there on the internet that cater to, really playing the points and miles game hard. But for the typical listener of this podcast, who are not to that really extreme advanced level, the point for me here is I just want to help the average consumer, the average gay listener of this podcast, leverage points and miles in a way to help them reduce the cost of their travels, not in a way to like game the system and take things to the extreme. So that's why I wanted to keep things nice and simple for you. And hopefully today I have done just that. All right, that'll be it for today. But just a quick reminder, if you would like to support me, please give the video a like. If you haven't subscribed, just hit the subscribe button. It's free, honestly. I know every creator is telling their viewers and listeners to like and subscribe. You know what, honestly, I don't even care super much about the likes and subscribes. Like people would naturally hit like on a video that they like. So that's why I don't do the call to action a lot of saying, hey, like and subscribe. I don't actually say it very much, but it is free. And, it does help the channel, like YouTube reads the Spotify, YouTube, all the apps, they do know when people click a like, they do know when people click a subscribe, and it does actually help the channel from the algorithm standpoint. But if you'd like to support me even more, if you're watching this on YouTube, and by the way, every episode of my podcasts are available on my YouTube channel, Just Joey T. If you just click on the three little dots, that little button below the YouTube video, you'll get some more options. And one of those options is a thanks button where you can leave me a little tip within YouTube. Or I also have an app called Buy Me a Coffee, and I'll link it in the link tree down below in the description. And on Buy Me a Coffee, you can support your favorite creators with a tip, a one-time tip that way. So yeah, again, thank you for listening, and thank you so much for your support. And until next time, bye y'all.